Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet, and welcome to my post-race reaction for the Abu Dhabi or Yas Marina GP race, the last F1 race of the season. What was your thoughts? Did it give you enough excitement throughout this race? Did that first lap incident, give you the edge that you needed? Did Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc working their way through the field, keep you on your toes to see how far they could make it all the way up? Or was this kind of a boring race where most things were just kind of, tail to nose, going around the track, doing the DRS action? Yes, we had a little bit of action throughout this race, but it wasn't a tremendous amount. And of course, we only had the main strategy of the one pit stop. So there wasn't a lot of pit stop strategy involved in trying to undercutting or overcutting people throughout this race. So in general, I thought it was kind of a dull race, even though it was the final race of the season, and we already knew who the driver's champion was. We were just kind of waiting to figure out who the constructor's champion was and kind of where everybody else fell in on the rankings. So it was kind of like just we're going through the motions. Yes, it was kind of an emotional race for a lot of drivers, and that was nice to see and kind of sad to see in certain regards of drivers not being able to come back next season. And then you have the mix of drivers going to different teams, and so they're saying farewells to their former team and saying hello to their new team. But overall, the race itself, I thought was kind of a dull race. So what was your thoughts on that race? I'll go through the drivers from the last to first and tell you how well I think they did and what happened to them if I know. So without further ado, we will go over to the last 10 spots, the 20th through 11th spot. And we start off with Sergio Perez, who qualified in 10th and ended up in 20th. He had a nice contact with Bottas at the very beginning, spun, and then basically killed the car and was not able to restart that car and was able to retire that car. So he dropped down 10 spots right at the very beginning of this race, finishing last with a DNF. Pretty much, I would say it's going to be pretty much a foresight of what his career is this season, kind of dropping off, not giving the points that he needs to try to really push the Red Bulls forward. So I think he is going to be out, as like most of the rumors say, out of this Red Bull seat, even though he has that contract. He'll probably end up being either a reserve driver or a PR, person for Red Bull in that regard, but won't be actually in the driver's seat for the main Red Bull team at least. And that's kind of sad to see in the regards of everything, but you can't really argue with what he's done the last several races where he hasn't been able to really put the points pressure on anybody else to get those extra positions to really help, Max Verstappen in this run. So it's a shame that he had to end that way, and it's probably not kind of a bad farewell in general to that Red Bull, but I think that is his last race. Now we had Franco Colapinto, who qualified in 20th and ended up in 19th. He did get a 5-place penalty for a gearbox change that put him down in the back of the grid. And then he had contact with Oscar going around the track where Oscar just kind of got caught up and ran into the back of him, gave him a puncture, which dropped him back farther. And then he ended up having some other issues and decided to just retire that car on lap 28. So I think that was just a bad situation in general. I know that came on the radio basically saying that it didn't want it to end that way with him, as he doesn't have a ride for next year. And he looked semi-promising, but yet he's had a lot of incidences, doing some damage to the car. So I think that's going to hurt his prospects of jumping into a big team right away. So I think he's have to look for a smaller team or look for another spot at Williams after next year to see how things shake out in the driver's spot. But unfortunately, not really due to his fault, he wasn't able to finish this race, and so he ended up having to drop back into that 19th position. Valtteri Bottas had another bad spot, starting the race in 9th position, and ended up in 18th with the DNF himself. Basically, he had contact with Perez early on, which gave him a 10-second penalty with that spin with Perez that knocked Perez out of the race. Then he had a puncture when he came in contact with K-Mag later when he kind of locked up the tires and ran to the side of K-Mag, and then basically ended up having to retire that car at that point in time. He lost 4 positions at the very start of the race. He did go to lap 6 before switching to a set of hards from that set of mediums that he was on at the beginning of the race. I think he was kind of desperate to have a good race, and that kind of showed in his results of this one, having kind of going down to the inside and not being able to really control that stake. I know he was hoping to be up there and getting some decent spots and possibly points for stake F1, as he's been in the back of the pack for so long, and they were starting to see some glimpses of hope in that stake F1. So I think just basically due to that last race scenario, I think he was kind of gambling a little too hard, and that showed, and it kind of cost him in this race and made him drop down to 18th with that DNF. Now we have Liam Lawson, who qualified in 12th and ended up in 17th. He passed Hamilton on lap 11 for 11th spot, but then had a bad pit stop where his lug nut was not really fully attached, where he had to come back in and get that situated, which threw him back in the pack into that running. And then he basically ended up having some other issues in that car that decided to just retire that car as well. Didn't quite make it all the way around on that last lap, having some issues, had to pull over to the side. So didn't cause any yellow flag, well, counts yellow flag, but it didn't cause any safety cars or anything to that effect, but because he got it off in a good spot, which was good to see the end of the race in that running. Unfortunately, he didn't get to show what he could do. He did gain 2 spots at the very beginning of the race, and went on set of mediums like most people, except for Hamilton, who did the hard tire. So he was on a set of mediums to lap 23, which then he had to come back in on lap 24 to get that situated, and then he went back in lap 29 to try to get that another set of tires in that setting. So I ended up having to just retire the car because of some engine issues that were cropping up in that RB, unfortunately. So he's kind of ended up behind his teammate, even though he is kind of rumored to be into the full Red Bull seat next year. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But it wasn't a very good race for Liam Lawson in this last stint. Kevin Magnussen also was doing a lot better than he should have been doing initially, and then he got caught up in some issues that made his last hurrah was a little bit downer for him. He did qualify in 14th, not quite where he wanted to qualify at, and ended up in 16th, mainly because of a bad pit stop that kind of kept him a little longer than he wanted to. And then he got contact with Bottas near the end, which then didn't help him at all. And then he decided to switch over to some soft tires to try to go for that fastest lap, which he did get. So that was kind of a last, saying, here's something for you to accomplish in your running, to kind of give you at least a little check mark on your resume in that regard for him in this race. So he was kind of in this mix. He didn't do bad, but he didn't do great. I think some of the circumstances caused him to get dropped back, which then he was just fighting for other things and got caught up even more. So not necessarily his fault. And he had a really good start. He gained 7 spots at the very beginning of the race, got himself up into that top 10, which I was hoping to have both Haas's in the top 10, putting pressure on Alpine, but unfortunately that did not play out due to his pit stop and due to that contact. So he started off on a set of mediums and went to lap 12, switched to a set of hards, and then he went to lap 30, switched to a set of softs, and then did a second set of softs on lap 55. He did pass Perez on lap 1 for 7th. He passed Bottas on lap 16, on lap 31, and then he passed Lawson on lap 58 for that 16th position as well. So in all, decent run, just kind of got caught up in the mix. So it was a bad situation for K-Mag, and that was kind of a downer since that was his last race for F1, as he's probably moving over to a different racing season, or league in that regard for him. So it would have been nice to have him, give that extra push for the Haas team to, end off on a really positive note. But unfortunately, the circumstances didn't allow him to do that. So I think it wasn't as I said, necessarily his fault, but just kind of got caught up in some of that area around him. Jack Doohan giving his premiere. Ended up starting the race in 17th and ended up in 15th. Not a great run, but not a horrible run for jumping in the car at the end of the season. He was saying he's really tired and he's going to have to work on his thumb movements because he was having a hard time pushing buttons by the end of the race. Not really used to the rigors and all of that for a full race in F1. Trying to figure out the full length, 57 laps is a long time to go when you're not used to the car stamina aspect of it. But he did a decent job, I think. He did pass Bottas on lap 26 for 16th position. He did start on a set of mediums and went to lap 22 before switching to a set of hards. He did gain one position at the very beginning of the race, so not a real bad there, but just kind of giving him the feel. I think he was trying to stay ahead of the Haas's, which he did barely, with being ahead of K-Mag. And that was mainly his goal, was trying to be ahead of one of them, which he accomplished, and then get some experience in that Alpine for the development cycle, and then for getting ready for next year. So I think that was his main objective. Unfortunately, I would have liked to see him a little bit tighter with his teammate, but that didn't quite happen for between him and Gasly. Lance Stroll had another bad day, in my general opinion. I think he is kind of running low on what he can do in that Aston Martin, and it's kind of strange to keep him in that, even though his dad has basically bought him that team in regards to that. He did start the race off in 13th position and ended up a spot down in 14th. He had a decent start, gaining 4 positions at the start of the race, but then got with that 10 place penalty for a power unit that he did. He got a 5-second penalty for track limits. Had that black and white flag on lap 19, so he was not really obeying the track limits from the very beginning for the most part, and so that's kind of bad on him in that regard, in my view. He should have been a little bit more consistent, trying to keep in those lines and not put pressure and get that 5-second penalty put in place. But he did pass Doohan on lap 41 for that 13th position, passed Tsunoda on lap 57 for 12th, and then ended up dropping back into that last position, that 14th position that he ended up in because of the 5-second penalty. And then we come to Juan Yuzhou, who says farewell again. Started our race off in 15th and ended up in 13th. Got a 5-second penalty for a false start, which is kind of a little rough. I didn't see that, but apparently he was rolling at the very beginning of the race, at the start of the race instead of clear. He pretty much had a clean race in this run, not quite getting up to the points where he would like to be like last race, but did a decent job in this for his last run in that Stake F1. I think he was hoping to be a little farther up in the grid as his teammate was starting to up ahead of him. He was kind of running on the tails of him, trying to help them get some points that turned around on him, trying to be able to be the front runner in this run. He did start off a set of mediums and went to lap 12 before switching to a set of hards, and then went to lap 39 before switching to a second set of hards. And so those back runners having to do a 2-stop pit strategy put them even more at a disadvantage in that regard. So I think overall, I think he did a decent job. Not the greatest job, but not a decent job in that back running Stake F1 car. Then we come to Yuki, who qualified in 11th and ended up in 12th. He had a very bad start. He had like a clutch issue or something going on. You saw that running. You could hear it like catching in and out at the very beginning of the race, losing 6 spots at the very beginning. And then he basically kind of stayed in that back area. He did pass Doohan for 16th position on lap 3. He went to lap 22 on a set of mediums before switching to a set of hards, and then just kind of ran around just outside of that point range, not quite where he needed to be. He got the front runners kind of moving forward through him, not being able to put a lot of defensive action on them, but it was a decent run. If it wasn't for that start, he might have been able to get into the point. So I think it was a decent run for Yuki. And it's kind of disappointing, especially with all the rumors going around that he's going to be overlooked for that top position. And so I know he's kind of frustrated in that as well. But I think it's a decent run for Yuki in all of his runnings this year, developing himself and getting better in that RB car. So hopefully he can really put the pressure on next year and really show what he can do and get himself looked at for some other team to take him up if it's not going to be the Red Bulls. Then we have the Alex Albon, who started the race off in 18th position and ended up in 11th. I have Alex getting a 5-place grid penalty for taking on a new grid box. And then he passed Juan Yujo on lap 14 for 16th position. He didn't gain 3 positions at the very start of the race and went to lap 12 before switching to a set of hards and stayed on those set of hards the rest of the way. That kind of almost put him into the points, but he was at those really old tires that was not holding up near the end, so he couldn't defend well enough to keep that 10th and final point position, dropping him to 11th. So overall, I think it was a good run for Alex Albon in that Williams. I know they were hurting a lot this year trying to keep those cars fixed and running, and with their transition over the back end of how those things were getting made and getting done, hopefully they'll be in a better spot next year where they can start really developing that car in a better situation and have that more streamlined in that effort. I think they came on fairly well this year, and Alex is doing a good job in that Williams, definitely. So as I said, not quite the race he wanted. He wanted to end up in points, but it's still a good race for Alex Albon. Of course, that gets us to the bottom 10. And now we'll hit the top 10, where we have Oscar Piastri, who qualified in 2nd and ended up in 10th. He had a kind of a bad day overall. He lost 17 places at the very beginning of the race, mainly due to that contact with Max that spun both of them around and made him, have to come into that pit stop way earlier than he was expecting to. And then he was getting caught behind a virtual safety car when he get the Constantini effect. He kind of ended up having contact with Franco in the back that got him another 10-second penalty. So that dropped him back farther. And so I think overall, it was a really good effort from Oscar to get back up into the 10th and get that final point just in case they needed some extra point leverage in this run. So overall, I think he did a good job. He had that, as I said, that one mistake with running into the back of Franco, which is definitely his fault and definitely deserved the 10-second penalty, but was able to basically recover from that mentally as well so that he could get back into that point range. He started off in a set of mediums and went to lap 4, as I said, switched to a set of hards, then switched to another set of hards on lap 32. He had contact with Max at the very beginning that spun him around, and then had contact later with Franco. He did pass Stroll on lap 15 for 13th position. He passed Stroll again on lap 39 for 14th. Passed Tsunoda on lap 49 for 11th. Passed Alex Albon on lap 54 for 10th. So overall, I think he did a decent job to getting back into that point range. Even though it's just that last point, it helped them solidify that action for the Constructors' Championship, even though they had it, even with he was not there. Just giving that little extra effort, showing them he can get himself back into the running after those incidences early on in the race to come through, kind of showing his mettle in this race in his career. So he's young, he's good. Look forward to seeing what he can do. I know he's going to be able to put a lot more pressure on Lando next year in that running, so we'll have to wait and see how that dynamic plays out for McLaren. But him getting caught out and then, of course, getting dropped back in, then having that incident, it's his fault, but it says a lot for him to be able to continue going without just throwing it all away. saying it's not worth my time and effort to try to push back into the point. So I think that was a good showing for him. And I liked his attitude overall after the race in his viewpoint, saying when they were asking about Max's incident, he said that Max came over and apologized to him. And then, of course, then he mentioned his own incident, saying, he's not there for, showing how good he is, considering he's made mistakes himself. So a good to down-to-earth person for what my view is for that run. So good run for Oscar, even though he was down in 10th. So this leads us to Fernando Alonso, who actually had a decent run. He qualified in 8th, or started the race in 8th, and ended up in 9th. Basically gained 2 positions at the very start of the race, so pretty good start from him. He passed Doohan on lap 23 for 10th, passed Tsunoda on lap 46 for 10th, and then passed Alex Albon on lap 52 for 9th. So he got back up into the points, had a decent run, started off in mediums, went to lap 13 before switching to a set of hards, and went to lap 37 before switching to a second set of hards, when he still was able to make it up into that point range, which was good to see for the Aston Martins and Alonso in general, putting a little bit more pressure on the front runners, getting some extra points near the end, as they've been struggling a little bit more lately in these last few races. So it's good to see him back up in the running for this race. Nico did pretty much everything he could. Started the race in 7th and ended up in 8th. Basically, I have him starting on a set of mediums, so went to lap 13 before switching to a set of hards that he went the rest of the race on. He did get a 3-place penalty for director's instructions not obeying, which is basically overtaking in the pit lane during qualifying, or I believe. And so that pushed him back from that front runner positions in that qualifying session, which was kind of a downer in regards, but was able to still get up there and get some decent points, not quite enough points to keep Haas to push over into that 6th position, but still a run for him, showing how good he can do in this overall aspect. He did pass Doohan on lap 18 for 10th, and I have him passing Tsunoda on lap 20 for 9th. So a decent run for him, getting up there in the points, getting decent points for Haas. Unfortunately, it wasn't high enough past Gasly to really put some pressure on the Alpines, but still a good run to end his stay at Haas. We'll have to see how he does in that Stake F1 Audi car next year, and see if they can get some development in that car to really put some pressure besides being at the back of the field. Hopefully that'll work out for him and he can work forward. I kind of hate to see him leave Haas, but hopefully he will succeed in that Audi position as well. Then we have the great run from Pierre Gasly, and ended up starting the race in 5th and ended up in 7th. He gained 2 positions at the start of the race, so it was a good start for him. He passed Doohan on lap 15 for 9th and passed Tsunoda on lap 17 for 8th. He did start in the race on mediums and went to lap 14 before switching to a set of hards, which he then went the rest of the way on that set of hards. So they had that era of people kind of pitting a little earlier and going the stint on those hards tires all the way. So I think they finally saw that the 2-stop wasn't going to cut it, and so they had to extend on that second stint to really maintain those positions. But a really good run from Pierre Gasly in that overall aspect of that Alpine coming back this season, as they were nowhere at the very beginning of the season and were able to really work hard and get that Alpine competitive, and finally ended up into that 6th constructors position. So a great job for them and a good job for Pierre Gasly, bringing on a new teammate as well. So we'll have to see how that dynamic plays out as well next year. And then we got Max Verstappen, the world champion, who started the race off in 4th position and ended up in 6th. He basically came in and overtook Sainz on that first corner and was basically coming alongside of Oscar in that run, and kind of caught that tire-to-tire action, was spun both of them around. That was deemed his fault and given a 10-second penalty for that, which pushed him back in the field, which then he had to kind of come back into that running to try to get as many spots as possible. He went to lap 29 on a set of mediums before switching to a set of hards, which then he went the rest of the way. As I said, he did lose 7 positions at the start of the race, basically because of that contact, the spinning. Was able to get back into it and recover for the most part in going on that run. He did pass Lawson on lap 3 for 10th, passed Alonso on lap 37 for 8th, passed Hulkenberg on lap 44 for 7th, and then passed Gasly on lap 46 for that 6th and final position that he ended up in. So a good run for him. Kind of a bad spot on him of gauging where if he could actually overtake, that McLaren at the very beginning. But overall, I think it was a really good run for Max in everything. I know he was trying a little harder to go through in this run, trying to show the lastly what he could do, and that kind of turned slightly against him as he overestimated his position on the McLaren. But he was able to pull back and still get some decent points and keep the Red Bull where they are and kind of show and put some pressure on those Mercedes as well. So we'll have to see how that plays out next year and see if his teammate can help him, Red Bull go to that championship, or if this is going to be more of a fight in regards to everything in general, because it's going to be a tighter field. George Russell had a decent run. He did gain 2 spots at the beginning of the race. He started off on a set of mediums and went to lap 26 before switching to a set of hards. He basically had a nice clean race. It didn't have a whole lot of action. He did pass Gasly, kind of getting stuck behind Gasly a couple times during this race. He was stuck behind Gasly at the started off with, and then Gasly ended up pitting and letting him run in some free air for a little while, but then had to come back out and then get behind Gasly again during his pit stop, and was able to pass him on lap 28 for that 6th position, where he ended up running and then getting passed by Lewis eventually at the very end of the race into the 4th running position. So a really good race overall, just not quite the life on those tires at the end of the race to really put up that extra oomph to keep his teammate behind him at the very end. So a good race from him, a good showing from him. Mercedes looks like they're coming a little bit farther back, getting put a little more pressure. Not quite where they want to be, really putting pressure on the folks in front, but right there close. So hopefully with some few tweaks over the break that they can kind of come out strong and be a contender in all that mix and have like 4 teams in that running. That'll be interesting to see. Lewis had a bad qualifying session, ended up at 16th. Starting the race in 16th position, and it ended up in 4th. So he had a really good showing during this race for his last race of the season and last race with Mercedes. So as he moves to Ferrari next year, so we'll have to see how that plays out. But a good race to end his relationship and his run, his dynasty, kind of with Mercedes. He gained 4 positions at the start of the race. Went to lap 34 on a set of hards, so he's the only person to start off with a set of hards, and then switch to that set of mediums where he finished the race on. So he passed Lawson on lap 11 for 11th spot. He passed Hulkenberg on lap 40 for 6th, passed Gasly on lap 43 for 5th, and then passed his teammate George on the very last lap for 4th. So a really good run from him, keeping him in the mix. I know at one point he said, how far they were up ahead, and they were saying like 14 seconds, and he was like, what? But he was able to make that up and even pass his teammate within that 14-second time frame. So he was really doing a good job in that Mercedes, really putting pressure on his teammate and running, and had a really good showing for Mercedes, which is always good to see, leaving on a positive note. Then we get Charles Leclerc, who was phenomenal in this race, I think. Ended up having that issue with the power unit. So getting that replacement, giving him the 10-place penalty. So he ended up starting the race in 19th and made it all the way up to 3rd. He had an excellent start of the race, gaining 11 positions on the very first lap. In this race, it was kind of crazy how he's able to make his way through this. Then he was on that set of mediums, went to lap 20 before switching to a set of hards, and was able to place that correctly in that pit stop strategy so he can come back out. So he passed K-Mag on lap 7 for 7th, passed Alonso on lap 10 for 6th, passed Hulkenberg on lap 13 for 5th, and then he basically passed Lawson on lap 24 for 7th, and passed Gasly on lap 25 for that 6th position, and was able to work his way up through that pit stop strategy to be in that nice 3rd position. Got the driver of the day from coming back to the field, doing everything he could for Ferrari to win the Constructors' Championship. Unfortunately, they were falling just short of being able to get past Lando and claiming that championship for themselves. So a really good job from Charles Leclerc. I said, did phenomenally job getting everything he could out of that Ferrari, playing everything smooth and cool, not, making mistakes and to that effect. Deserves driver of the day, but if I would have given somebody else the driver of the day, I would have probably said Lando, because he came out, led every lap, made sure that McLaren won their Constructors' Championship, even with the pressure of his teammate dropping back after that first lap. So that's where I would have put the driver of the day if it wasn't for Charles Leclerc. Then you have his teammate, Carlos Sainz, who started the race off in 3rd and ended up in 2nd. Did a really good run from him, kind of got out there in the mix, kind of thread the needle on the incidents with Max. So he was able to keep that clean, ran a full race without having to do a whole lot of passing. I don't have him passing anybody directly on track, but he went to lap 25 on a set of mediums before switching to a set of hards. He did gain that one position at the start of the race due to that, contact with Oscar and Max, but was able to keep out of the way so he didn't get collected in it, which was always good. Good showing for him to end his stint at Ferrari. I know he wanted to stay at Ferrari longer, so him going to Williams next year, we'll see if he can actually develop Williams in any way to be competitive. I know he'll be fighting more at the back of the field, so we'll have to see how he plays out in that era of the tracks instead of the front running spots where he likes to be. So we'll have to see how that plays out. I do like Sainz, and so hopefully he can really thrive there at Williams. And then we get Lando, who started the race in 1st and ended up in 1st. Had a really good race all the way around. Had a good start, kept himself out in 1st. Didn't have to go out through and pass anybody. Didn't have to really deal with that. He had to do some dirty air at some point while he was lapping drivers, but was able to handle that, keep the tire management under control, and win it significantly in this race. Great to see. He went to lap 26 on a set of mediums before switching to a set of hards and made it all the way. So to kind of give you a rundown, on lap 5, he was 2.8 seconds ahead of Sainz. On lap 10, he was 3.3 seconds ahead of Sainz. And at lap 15, he was still 3.6 seconds ahead of Sainz. At lap 25, roughly a little under halfway, he was 3.7 seconds ahead. Lap 40, he had gotten that up to 4.5 seconds ahead, and by the end, he was 6 seconds ahead of Sainz. So had it underhand the whole way, was able to maintain that, had to keep his tires. A really good job for him. Did everything he could, and did it for McLaren, winning their championship. And he says basically he's learned a lot this season. Hopefully he's learned the ins and outs of how to really be competitive against Max and be able to put pressure and really fight for that championship, as he had made mistakes early on in this season that he admitted to, and hopefully that'll play out next year with them, fighting and having a good, maybe a 3 or 4 way run for the championship in that year. But we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But this race did great. Won McLaren's their constructors championship, and did everything he could in this race. So really good job. And I said he probably would have given the driver of the day. if it wasn't for Charles Leclerc. So let us go to the driver standings. And of course, we have Max Verstappen as the championship, who already won, but ended the season with 437 points, where Lando Norris had 374 points. So quite a bit away, but we'll see how that plays out next year. Now we have the only other change for this last race is Pierre Gasly was able to overtake Nico Hülkenberg for that 10th position with 42 points over Nico Hülkenberg's 41 points. So I know Nico was hoping to get a little bit more, so just a couple of points away, trying to put pressure on him. But good job from both of those drivers and both those teams to get them into that run, and that was the results. And of course, we have Jack Doohan entering the standings in that 24th position as he, completes his first and only race for this season. So now we have 24 drivers in a mix where we're supposed to have 20 drivers. So that's kind of an interesting lineup and makes for a crazy season, which will hopefully still have a fun season next year with all the new drivers in place. So the constructor standings, do we have any changes? We do not have any changes. But we have McLaren now with 666 points. So jokingly, did they have a deal with the devil and make that run? This said it's just a joke. I think that was kind of funny the way they ended up with that point number. But they were ahead of Ferrari with 652 points. So it's fairly close run between those two constructors in this final stint of the season. But McLaren be able to pull it out. And then, of course, we had Alpine gaining a little bit of an advantage over Haas with 65 over Haas's 58. So still a tight run there. And then, of course, Aston Martin gaining just a couple points just to show that they are still in it in that middle of that pack. So they'll have to hopefully put some more pressure on the rest of the field next year as they start off strong and ended up tailing off the last couple seasons. Hopefully they can kind of put it all together for a full season. So that ends the wrap up of the Abu Dhabi post-race reaction. But what is going to come up since we're at the last race? Well, we have how bad were my preseason predictions? And if you've seen that, they're pretty bad. But I'll probably go over those my next video on showing what my preseason predictions were and what the final was and how badly I did that. And then I'll probably end up doing little driver stack ups and team stack ups to show how they ended up comparative to those around them and where they were lined up in the final running of those championships. So until then, I will see you on the grid and farewell.